Do you think they should label them a terrorist group?
Like in the United States, I've been covering this stuff for 21 years, or 22 years I've been in Mexico now. And I used to have some kind of easy answers for this stuff and say, this is what we do. 3 things. Right now, I don't see easy solutions to this. I would say, I don't know if labeling, there's different aspects. If you label them terrorist, if the United States labeled these groups terrorist organizations, but still if the United States, could go in there with drone strikes or, military raids, it's still not going to solve this because these groups are so powerful and so many people. So you've basically got, there's kind of 3 things that I look at of whether they do or not. And I'm not saying it's an outrageous thing to do to label them as terrorist groups. But there's 3 things that I look at as kind of a solution to this, or as kind of long term. So one of them is you have to build up some law enforcement which works in Mexico. Now, when you're dealing with cartels that are this heavily armed, it's extremely hard, but it's got to be, I don't see any other way. You've got to have law enforcement bodies and trying to push this back. And some of this is like we're doing in Mexico City, trying to say we've got to lower the high murder rate in these areas. We can't allow armed groups to operate. We can't allow blatant impunity. So some of it's about building some body of law enforcement. Now they have to maybe, say, well, we've got to accept that we're dealing with heavily armed groups and you've got to have a certain rule of engagement for that. But you need some law enforcement in Mexico. The second thing, and I believe this does really work. I've spent a lot of time interviewing cartel members over the last 22 years. A lot of the hitmen, some of the higher ups. If you look at the hitmen, then they're often recruited into the cartels when they're about 12 years old. There's different stories, you find a bunch of different stories. But these are kind of typical stories. You have some of these neighborhoods, say in Juarez, Tamaulipas, the kids will be on the block and the cartels will approach them and recruit them 12 years old, 13 years old, and start off like, okay, you're going to be a lookout for us. And we're going to pay you $30 a week. And we're going to give you a radio or a cell phone, and you're going to send a message every time whatever comes past. And you hear these guys, Halcones, you hear these guys signal the way they're talking. One time I was with the police in Monterrey, and we were listening in to the Halcones, and they were talking about us. We were listening into them, spying on us.
Yeah.
You've done plenty of that stuff. But anyway, so these kids, the 12 years old, they get recruited as lookouts, start taking money from the cartel, and they start getting trained to become hitmen. Some of them will carry out murders, 14, 15 years old. There was one guy who was a police officer who was also working with cartels. And he was describing how he would get the kids to cut up the bodies to start making them, lose their fear, become brutal. Interviewed another guy for the Barrio Azteca, which is a faction of the Juarez cartel, who described how he looked for the kids. He would want to find kids who are got some hate in their heart. I don't want kids who are got nice families. It's kind of the opposite of the, I'm not sure exactly military recruitment, but these guys are looking, how do we, they're good, they need constant recruitment. We want to find guys who are messed up. And you interview some of these sicarios, one guy I talked to who was abandoned as a kid. His parents, left him with nothing. And he was like, I got hate for the world. So for me, the cartel gives me something, and I want to hurt other people. I don't care. I want something for myself. But then you get kids in carrying out multiple murders. So now once you get somebody who's 18, they carried out multiple murders, they cut up bodies, they've done decapitations. You can't do much for that. But you do need help and strategies to reach some of these kids before they get recruited by the cartel. Very specific, focused programs. Not just throwing money out there, but very specific focus programs in the neighborhoods where the kids are being recruited. And, one guy I was talking to was like, yeah, we know on the block who are the kids who are going to be recruited by the cartel. We know who the 10 kids are. It's just waiting for it to happen. Why is the government doing nothing? to try and do that. So that's another thing. I mean, it's kind of crime prevention or like changing this.
So you're talking about implementing some kind of an educational service for kids in these
I think
in
you
these
need
states, territories.
Yeah, I mean, more focused. I mean, it's like about like say, look very strategically. Where's the high recruitment for these cartels? And then who specifically are the kids? And then like saying, talking to the parents. You know, your kid's it's gonna be in a cartel with the next. You know, we can offer something, keep them in school, like offer something to try and like improve, learn a trade, learn something to have a living. Because you know, your kid's going to be dead. Could well be dead. I mean,
How many of these kids have parents who are generational cartel members, though? This isn't a new problem.
Yeah.
I mean, you've been down there for 22 years. If somebody got recruited at 12, they could have, you know.
I mean, it's the sad thing. Like, well, remember I was covering the stuff in 2004, when it kind of started escalating, turf war there. And the kids there were not even born, who are now hitmen. There's a graveyard in Sinaloa called the Omaya Cemetery. Amazing. If you ever get a chance to go down there, it's one of the most surreal, crazy graveyards in the world. Massive mausoleums for these big traffickers. But there's loads of graves of hitmen. And you see loads of graves of kids, 18, 19, 20, 21. And, you know, you see some of them are young fathers, and you'll see like on like Father's Day. I remember when I was on there Father's Day one time, all these big balloons and blankets and everything like. But also like sometimes the mothers will go down there and they'll have photographs. And you know, how many of these kids are going to die that young? I mean, think about it. In Mexico, there's been over the last 10 years more than 300,000 bodies. Like, you know, and it's going on 20 years. It's, you know, 500,000. It's like, you know, there's a lot of, you know, these people are going to die. So how can you reach and try and stop, say, like the new generation? I mean, yeah, you say like some of them are like multi-generation cartel members, but then you talk to some of the cartel members. One of the things that I approach when I meet a lot of these guys and you give a pitch, I want to talk to you. And I often say, well, like, you know, and this is, you know, partly journalistic spiel, or you're trying to meet somebody and you want to talk to them. But it's just, you know, I say this from my heart. You know, I know you don't necessarily want this for your kids. You don't want your kids to live a life you liked. You know, you have the kind of glamour of like seeing like Narcos TV series and beautiful women and these big mansions, but most of them are not living like that. You know, that's, you know, the bosses, but most of them, you know, they're living violent, brutal lives, and they're going to be dead or in prison. They're going to be committing murders. You talk to them like, okay, you know, how do you feel about, you know, they can, these guys. One guy interviewed him in prison in Ciudad Juarez. In the prison in Ciudad Juarez, where there's in fact also they did a raid on it this January as well, and they bust out a bunch of guys and killed 10 guards. One of the craziest prisons in the world. I was in there some years back, and they're basically these wings which are segregated by cartel groups. So they have the Juarez cartel, which has the Barrio Azteca in one part, and they have the Sinaloa cartel, which has these groups called Los Mexicles and the artist assassins in our part. And they have this weird evangelical Christian part. And I was in there, the time that the prison director, and it was open, and he let me keep on going back and forth in there, spend days in his prison. And they have these like weird evangelical ceremonies in the prison. They were like dancing, getting rid of their demons and stuff. It was kind of crazy scenes. And I talked to one guy who was quite a heavy cartel guy, who'd been a head of assassins and pretty brutal stuff. And I was there, it was me and a cameraman, we were there in the cell, and we started talking to him. And he started kind of going on this full-on, you know, confession, how he decapitated people while they're still alive and stuff, and all this kind of stuff. And we were there, and the prison guy was there, and he said to the guy, you know, you're saying this on camera. You know, what are the implications? They can see your face here. And he's like, oh, no, you can't show my face. Oh, okay, we'll black out. And he goes, oh, and my voice is also, like, people will know my voice because I've done a lot of phone calls, and people can hear my voice and stuff, phone calls, threatening people and stuff. And then we said, like, we're not going to show the video by using material, the written material of what he said. But it's not, you know, a nice story. These guys, a lot of them don't have nice lives. It's not like a nice and a happy ending. This guy's got like I hacked all these people up. I got all this. It's not not necessarily ending nice for these guys. So there is ways to reach them. So I think that's one thing is like how do you try and approach this. But the third thing is like the drug profits. Now it's the economic motive is driving this. So we got this multi-billion-dollar industry. The United Nations a few years ago used to say it was worth $300 billion globally, drug trade. There's the RAND does a study there. They estimate the US illegal drug market is $150 billion
$150 billion
per year.
Wow.
Okay, you see these. You talk to drug traffickers. Like they buy. Okay, when you go into cocaine, look at cocaine. $2,000 a kilo in Colombia. $12,000 in Mexico. $20,000 at the border, $30,000, $40,000 in New York, $100,000. Break it up, you can suddenly make it worth $200,000, $300,000. These profits going so fast. So this is what drug traffickers are doing. You put money in, you're taking money out. You're making huge, huge returns on your investments. So that's why, you see anybody. People want to be. We're in a capitalist world. People want to make money. You know what? The kind of business we're in, media. Yeah. not a lot of bucks in this. We struggle to make a buck out of this. Imagine that you can. I'm going to put in $100,000 to this, and I'm going to take away $500,000 in a couple of months, or more. So this is why this is so much money with this, and anyone can do it. So then people fight, and the most violent people take over. Now, at the same time, it's still not an easy solution. You say, I do believe that, legalize marijuana, might as well legalize marijuana, I think, at this point. But now we've got fentanyl. Now, fentanyl is, the profits are even bigger than cocaine because fentanyl, you've got these tiny little chemical stuff. It's extremely potent, less bulk. You don't have to worry about the whole harvesting process of growing coca leaves and crop spraying. Labs in China. The Mexican cartels want to even create their own precursors. So maybe even some point China could be outside the equation, but right now China's part of this. And you've got Americans dying now. This is horrific numbers. 107,000 overdose deaths in 2021 in the United States. About 70,000 involve fentanyl. Another 30,000 involve crystal meth.
They're using it as weapons now, too. I'm seeing over and over again. It's becoming more and more common. We're seeing police officers go down from fentanyl exposure. Before we get into the fentanyl crisis, I want to rewind, and I do want to say I think that the educational program that you're speaking of, is that just your idea, or is somebody looking at maybe implementing that? Because that could really work. In my initial thought was there's no way that's going to work because there's going to be multi-generational cartel members. But then when you talk about how their life is, one of the questions I ask a lot of the special operations guys, that I interview on here is, would you want your kid to have the life that you had knowing what you know now? And I don't know the exact number, but it's got to be 90% say, no, I don't want my kid to have to live through that.
Well, that's working on special operations with a government salary and people consider you a hero, let alone being, a cartel figure. I said there's different people, and some of them are unrepentant. Mm-hmm. Some of them have made it work for them. There's traffickers who've made this stuff work for them, have ended up stashing their assets and making deals with the government and they end up being kind of clean with it. But a lot of people, they don't want their kids. And it's this, it's bizarre. I've been with gang members, cartel members, and they're on one side, they killed 27 people. On the other side, they're talking about they go to the parents' evening at their kids' school, and they're kind of, some of these people. It's a weird, bizarre world. And you get into them, a lot of them, they kind of struggle and want to get a normal life out of this and stuff. They kind of live through this area of brutal violence. I think a lot of a very good point. I think a lot of the kind of special forces, military people, you can sit down and probably sit in a room with these guys and kind of understand and share a beer or have a cup of coffee because you both had, you've seen extreme violence. You know what it's like. You've seen dead bodies. You know what it's like. Okay, how do I process killing this guy? How do I deal with that? Now, some of these sicarios, I think they simply say, well, I'm taking orders. And they are. It's killing machines. You're recruited in. It's just like, well, I've got orders to go and kill these guys. That's what I'm doing. But if you look at, like, why does the real severe violence come about? Like, why, and ask this question, why do they leave? The worst atrocity, or one of the worst atrocities in Mexico, which I've covered, was 49 bodies dumped on a road, all decapitated, all with their hands cut off and their feet cut off. Dumped on a road.
Hey guys, let me tell you about this subscription service that I've been working real hard on called Vigilance Elite Patreon. Basically on Patreon, we have it broken up into 3 different tiers. We got tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. Let's dive in. Our tier 1 patrons get all the behind the scenes footage of the Shawn Ryan show. That could include behind the scenes photos, that could be side conversations that we have in between breaks, that could be specific questions that our patrons give us for the guest on the Shawn Ryan show, and a ton of bonus content that doesn't really fit into any specific category. For our tier 2 patrons, they get access to our tactical training library, which consists of well over 100 videos. We've broken those videos up into separate categories, and those categories are rifle fundamentals, pistol fundamentals, drills, tactics, driving, gear and weapon setups, and everybody's favorite, mindset. Also on tier 2, you will get a live update from me on the 1st and the 15th of every month where we talk about the upcoming guests on the Shawn Ryan show, plus all the benefits of tier 1. Our top tier, which is tier 3, gets full access to all the other tiers, plus they get full access to me where we do video teleconferencing, VTC, once a month. We discuss anything from tactics to current events to who's coming on the show. I take suggestions, and it's very interactive. No matter what tier you choose, the support is greatly appreciated, and it is the only thing that makes this show drive on. So thank you for all the support. See you on Patreon.
I got a call, and it was Sunday morning, it's 2012, I got a call, something's happening up in Monterrey. I jumped on a plane, flew up there. When I got up there, they'd taken the bodies and put them in the morgue. So I went in the morgue, and the smell of 49 bodies that they couldn't identify because they had no heads, no hands, and no feet. Just 49 lumps of meat. And it's like, why do they do that? What are they doing? Stuff. I actually recently met one of the guys in the cartel in prison in the United States who was involved in that cartel and gave me a bit of an explanation for what they were doing with that there. But one of the things you see is you have combatants, people with with structures, irregular armed organizations, and they're told to control territory. Top of their boss, you've got to control territory. So how do we control territory? We use terror. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, they are using terror or terrorists, but the same way that the military groups have done this for forever. How do we control this territory? We've got to make people scared of us.
I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah.
As brutal as it is, it does make a hell of a lot of sense. And when you're recruiting, kids that are 12, 13 years old, I mean, by the time, they have to be desensitized like that.
Yeah. They're training up these kids. Now, I tell you a horror story of that on that same investigation, same time I went up there. So I was in the morgue, 49 bodies, and making sense of this. And I came out of the morgue, and there was a bunch of like family members looking. And like I was like, what's going on? They talked to one woman. He's like, we're trying to find if our loved ones who have disappeared are among these victims. So we want to do DNA tests. And this one woman I talked to was a school teacher, and she described how her son was dragged out of their home on one evening. 18-year-old son, philosophy student. What happened was she was sitting there. She had her two sons there, one 18-year-old, one 15-year-old. And suddenly the door, bang, 15 guys come in with guns. Because once you get these armed groups, they can start, ravaging, attacking the local population. Storm in the house, start grabbing stuff. And then they say to her, which of your sons is the oldest? And she was like, can't even answer, can't even speak. Like, how to answer that? And the elder son raised his hand and said, I'm the eldest. You're not going to take my little brother. And they took him. She got a phone call the next day. Okay, give us this amount of money, we'll give your son back. She got the money, what you do as a parent at that moment? Got the money, wherever she could, relatives went up, handed it in, phoned up, no response. That was it, her son was gone. She was wandering around these events, these morgues, trying to find him. Other mothers I've talked to, very similar stories, who eventually found and identified the bodies of their kids after like 3 years. One of them in Veracruz, and I talked to her when she was looking for her kid who was taken away by our men. This guy worked at customs, 24 years old. And eventually she identified his body. She would come with a group of mothers searching for, you've just got thousands of disappearances that have come out of this conflict. So she was searching for for him with these various mothers. They were like marching. And a guy pulled up in a car and said, check out this place. And he had like a hand-drawn map. You might find some bodies here. So they went there first they said to tell the government, we got this information of her. The government were like, whatever. So they went there themselves and started digging up in this field. And started finding bones, skulls, bodies. Turned out to be the biggest mass grave in Mexico in the modern time, 297.
297 remains.
And this is like, 297 skulls. This is a mess because it's even hard. These like bones, 5 years old, 8 years old, 1 year old, 2 year old remains. They started pulling them out. Eventually, after several years, her son was identified in this mass grave. While they were pulling them out, so you start getting that smell again, that smell of kind of bodies being pulled out. Right in front of it was a housing area. Attempts at middle-class homes, the kind of, kiddies, bikes, basketball hoops, and the families that write things saying, we're getting this stink of this coming into our housing. And that's how like bizarre and messed up this conflict is.
That makes me just rethink what are they trying to achieve by storming people's houses and just pulling their kids out and telling them that they're going to take a ransom for it and then killing them.
So I think what happens a lot. There's every case has got different stories, but in that case, what you can happen. You've got the brutal soldiers. And you can relate to this. Being a soldier. Imagine the most kind of brutal soldiers, but so haven't gone through like good recruitment. They've kind of recruited the kind of meanest, hateful people they can find from the streets. But in a sense, they're victims and victimizers to an extent. But yeah, still, hateful, brutal people. Train them up, make them bloody, and tell you guys got to control these territories. Give them guns, make them commit terror. Then once you've got an armed group out there committing terror, okay. We want some money. Let's just go and raid a house. Let's go and raid a store. Let's go and steal a car. Do what we like. Raid someone's house, steal some stuff. Okay, we'll take this son. Let's get him to pay a ransom. Kill him anyway. Maybe we killed him already. Maybe we beat the crap out of this kid and killed him already. Or maybe we will recruit these people, and you get people who are recruited and forced to do stuff. Recruit and force them, put themselves, give these people we recruit, give them a gun and tell them to do some stuff.
Yeah.
Or hack up bodies, or do this or do that. It's brutal. It's kind of one of the crazy things about this is this. I mean, that kind of level of almost like medieval kind of warfare, kind of medieval morality in this stuff. And in some ways you can look at medieval stuff, the way these cartels operate. It's like fealty. You've got like one powerful drug boss, and then a guy below who's like swearing fealty to him, and a guy below swearing fealty to him. But that's happening. At the same time, you've got like, say, $1 trillion economy. You've got, you go to Mexico City, you can sit in a Starbucks and sit there on your laptop, and you can go to a trendy bar. You can go to Cancun and go to some beautiful beaches. And that's happening as well at the same time. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of weird how this kind of normality is around this like very harsh conflict.
Back to the education program that you had, is how many of these kids even have a choice? I mean, if they're going into residents, yanking them out and forcing them to go hack bodies up or become a Sicario hitman or whatever, even if it's just a lookout, is there even an option to say no?
Yeah, so that's the thing. So like, what you asked before about like, is this my idea? Like, I've interviewed and I've met plenty of social workers out there in Mexico and other places, in Jamaica, in El Salvador, and different places around the place. In Juarez, there was a woman I interviewed a bunch of times. I knew her. I still phone her up for a very, very real smart woman. She used to work in a factory herself in the city, and she was doing social work stuff like this. And she taught me a lot of this stuff. This is what's happening here. For a time, they were getting money. For a time when Juarez became the most murderous city in the world around 2010, 11. And then, you would get some of the US money going to these programs. USAID would start going to some of these social work programs and stuff. And it did help get the violence down for a while. But it kind of peters out, this stuff. And the Mexican government, they have, the problem is, is corruption. You get the Mexican government, some at the top level, will give out money for crime prevention. Then you get like middlemen who are not really good players, just stealing money. And then you get people like distracted and doing stuff like these really bad prevention programs, rather than getting to the really good people and there are good people there, who are on the ground, who know. And like say, it's kind of, you got to reach these kids young. More difficult question. I mean, I think all of us can probably agree that trying to steer 12-year-old kids away from this lifestyle is a good thing. More difficult is what you do with the kids who are 18 who have committed multiple murders already. I mean, there's not much help. I mean, can you create? But how can you find any way of them out of these cartels? Is it only prison or death for these guys? Mm-hmm. And they're committing a bunch of horrible crimes. So can you have kind of any armistice, any kind of peace deal? Disarmament, disbanding these forces. Maybe you can't. They kind of tried a bit in certain places and haven't really worked. In Colombia, they've kind of done that a bit more. It's like with the guerrilla group in Colombia. They're like, okay, we can try and disarm them and create a program to try and demobilize these people.
I reached out to somebody I'm trying to get on the show, actually. His name's Rick Doblin. He runs MAPS, which is a psychedelic nonprofit out of Canada. They do a ton of research. And he said he's actually in Iceland right now doing some type of a convention, big meeting with police officers and actually the person, I'm going to butcher this, but he's in charge of the prison system in Iceland, and they're thinking about implementing some type of a psychedelic program. It sounds like possibly with MDMA. In doing this therapy for people coming out of the prison systems, hoping that it's going to help them transition back into a normal life and increase the probability that they will not commit the same type of crime again. Do you think there's any possibility of that happening down there?
Well, see, one of the problems there is like if it's your family who had a kid butchered. You don't want no forgiveness for these people.
That's true.
I mean, there was a case of, I mean, sometimes they actually use, one of those they use young kids as well to commit murders, because young kids, in the Mexican justice system, in some states they can only get 5 years in prison.
Okay.
So there's kids who commit, I mean, there was a case of a kid, it was out of Ponchis a few years ago. He was actually a US citizen.
Really?
So he might be back here in the United States. But he was, this was going back a few years, and there was videos of him where they had guys hanging up, and he was part of the crew, and he was like a little mascot with the crew, like beating and torturing these guys. And then when the military caught him, and there was journalists around there when the military caught him, and I know one of the guys who was there, and he asked him this, that they put the cameras up. And this guy's got 3 sons and was kind of knew how to talk to him. And was like kind of stern, what have you done? I was like, I decapitated 4 people. It's like a 14-year-old kid said that. I had it on camera. It was on TV. It became a kind of big scandal. And the guy did 5 years or so. He's out, released, probably up here in the United States now. Other cases where people are older and they can give them longer sentences. But it's like how much, if you're the mother whose son was dragged away and murdered, you're going to want them in prison as much as you can. There's no death penalty in Mexico. Even a country where you can have 35,000 murders in a year and no death penalty.
That's ironic, isn't it?
Yeah. And another thing is that a lot of the time they call the hits executions.
Really?
So they call them in Spanish, they're like executions. They used to use the word like ejecutados, executed. So it's there like, from them it's like, well, from the cartel point of view, we have a kind of process here. We made a judgment, the guy's got to go, we're going to execute him. So you have all these executions.
They set the rules.
Yeah.
They set the rules.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, on the flip side, so I mean, on the one side, you've got, I really do believe in the social programs, particularly, say, for the younger kids. I mean, 12 years old and below, before they've been recruited. But, you've got to have create law enforcement. You can't have impunity. You can't have, now, in Mexico overall, about 90% of murders go unpunished. Now, it's really a bit more than that. That figure is like based on saying for every 100 murders, in 10 of those cases, somebody has been sent to prison or given sentence for those murders. The other 90, nobody has. Sometimes, really, though, they only caught one person, but there's several people involved. Sometimes they caught the wrong person. In some states, it's like 98% impunity. So for every 50 murders, only one of those cases has somebody being sentenced to it. Imagine if you could be a hitman, but also just a regular guy. You want to kill somebody, you think, well, I've got 1 in 50 chance of being caught. Not exactly a deterrent. So it's like you've got to fight impunity. But to do that when the situation is so bad, right? Like right now, you've got to have pretty hard enforcement and to try and bring things down, kind of set some rules and kind of like, push this down from where it's at right now, which is like on the edge, on the cliff of the abyss.
Interesting. Rewinding real quick all the way back to what we talked about, declaring them a terrorist organization or some type of insurgency. What would the downfall be?
The downside be of that? I mean, so we're talking about from the US policy point of view, yeah?
We can talk about it from any.
Or from the Mexican. I mean, because the Mexican, they do use sometimes terrorist charges against them.
I'm asking because I feel like the minute that happens, that they get declared a terrorist organization or an insurgency, funding is going to come extremely fast, and there's going to be a ton of it. So that's why I don't understand why they don't just.
Okay, so like say we look at this, like US says, let's look at the Sinaloa cartel or the Jalisco New Generation cartel, particularly been mentioned. But look at the Sinaloa cartel. So say if you declare, okay, the Sinaloa cartel is a terrorist organization. then it's not like, say with Al Qaeda, you know, you have these kind of certain targeted members you're going to target, you're going to find out these networks and go around and get them. We're talking about in Sinaloa. This is an organization, or it's a network really more than an organization, with hundreds of thousands of people involved in this. I mean, this is like you go to these villages, you go to town, go to the city. This is just a huge, huge thing. So you get drawn into saying, okay, we can just target anybody who's involved. And a lot of people, it's like a lot of the time it's a loose network in these places, or you know, you've got like it's kind of medieval in some ways. You have powerful people and people who swear loyalty to them in these areas. You're going to go in, you know, we're going to go into Mexico with US drones. Like, even if you take out 50 of these guys, 100 of these guys, it's going to keep on coming back. You're kind of drawn into a real swamp there. You know, and, you know, you start flying those kind of missions into Mexico. You know, is that going to, you know, it's not like there's a quick go in there and take it. It's not like there's like 1,000 guys you can take out. The problem's over. In the country of Mexico, we're talking about millions of people. It's more like, I mean, because these are, say, sprawling organizations, and you know, you say they're involved in a bunch of stuff. It's not only drugs anymore. Drugs are huge, and drugs finance them.
Hey everybody, I'm Shawn Ryan. Click here to subscribe to the Shawn Ryan Show YouTube channel for the hottest and most compelling interviews that you will not see anywhere else. I've also made a playlist of all the previous SRS episodes, so they're easy to find. You can find that right here.